So hi there, my name is Ian Finley. This is the first in our series on playwriting that will continue through a series of videos talking about the structure and tools to create a play. So we're going to go way back to the Greeks because they kind of invented this idea of playwriting. We're going to start with this guy. His name is Aristotle. Pretty famous guy, you may remember his name. If you've talked about Greek plays, you may remember a play called Oedipus Rex that was written by Aristotle's favorite playwright Sophocles, and he sort of writes about that a lot. And so studying playwriting usually begins with this guy. Not because he was old and he's dead, although that's true, but because he came up with the sort of first ideas about what makes a play work. So we're going to look at those today. So Aristotle said that there are 6 things that go into a play. And if you've got these 6 things, then you've got a play, basically. And he broke them down into sort of 3 big things and then 3 things that support those. So the 3 big things he talked about were plot, character, and theme, or idea. In your English classes, you may have talked about these same elements as they show up in like short stories or novels. You might also have talked about things like setting, but when it comes to drama, these 3 are the big ones. Plot, of course, is the story, what happens in the play. Character are the people involved in that, people or things, I guess. If you're watching Bambi, it's deer. If you're watching SpongeBob, it's sponges. But the characters are the people or things doing the plot. And theme is the idea behind it, what the playwright's trying to say. Typically, a playwright doesn't write something unless there's some kind of idea they want to get to the audience, some overall concept. Life is good, or life is bad, or love is great, or love sucks. So that's theme. So those are the 6 major elements. And then you've got the 3 elements that the playwright uses to get these across to the audience. Those are language, that is what the characters actually say; spectacle, that is what the audience sees the characters doing; and then this last one is a little bit different. The actual Greek word that Aristotle uses is melipoia, which literally translated comes to something like sweet honey music making, which is sort of weird. But we usually translate it as music. Now, not every play is a musical. This is something sort of important to keep in mind. Not every play has like songs and dance numbers in it, though some do. But every play does have a sort of sense of flow and of rhythm, of how the words bounce off of one another. So even in a play that's not a musical, we can say that there is something like music in the way that the characters' voices interact with one another. So that is that element. So we use these elements, language, spectacle, and music, to convey to the audience these elements, plot and character and theme. So these are the parts that you're going to put together to make a play. Now, Aristotle said the most important of them was plot, that you can't have a play unless you have a story, that you can't have a play without people doing something. I think Aristotle is wrong, and since he's dead, I get to be the person to make that decision. So we're going to start actually with character. Because what we found here in the 20th and the 21st century is that if you have really interesting characters, you can have a play or movie or television show that doesn't have much plot. There's a very famous play called Waiting for Godot, in which you've got 2 characters and they spend the whole first act waiting for this guy Godot to show up. And at the end of the act, a boy shows up and says, "Sorry, Mr. Godot can't make it. He'll be here tomorrow. When he shows up, he'll solve all of your problems." And then in the second act, can you guess what happens? They sit around and they wait for him again. And again, the little boy shows up at the end and says, "Sorry, Mr. Godot can't be here. He promises he'll be here tomorrow. He'll solve all your problems." And you can sort of guess what happens after that. This is a play where nothing happens. Very pointedly, nothing happens. It's called Waiting for Godot for a reason. But the characters are interesting. They're these sort of clown characters. And so it's an interesting play nonetheless. If you've seen shows like The Office or Seinfeld made a big point of this, in a lot of those episodes, nothing much happens, but they're still entertaining because the characters are entertaining. So that's going to be our way into this. We're going to be looking at character. When it comes to character and creating a character, you're going to want to do the same sort of thing that you would do as an actor. And that is, you're going to figure out the backstory to this character. And the word that I use for that is packing. The background for this character, what is packed into their brain. It's the same sort of exercise you would do when you were acting, if you were doing the Uta Hagen questions, for example, or any of the other backstory sort of stuff. You would figure out what happened in the life of this character. As a writer, you're going to do the same thing. So you're going to start by figuring out where this character is from, what they like, what they're interested in. You figure out all those details to help you create that character. Among the things that you need to figure out as part of that packing are their relationships. What this character thinks of that character. Most of a play is going to be a character interacting with other characters. So you need to know what those relationships are. Is this person secretly in love with that person? Does this person want to destroy that person because, you know, they destroyed their train set when they were 5? I don't know. But to know what those relationships are pretty specifically. The other super important thing, the thing that you cannot create a character without, the most important of all of these things, is what the character wants. The want is the engine that drives a character forward. This is true if you're acting, and it's especially true if you are writing. As a playwright, you must know what every character wants, because that want is going to drive them into action. We'll talk more about that when we talk about structure. But knowing what the character wants is going to be central to defining that character. And that want needs to be a pretty big want. It can't just be like a ham sandwich, unless that character is so desperate for a ham sandwich that they are willing to kill and betray and connive and trick and steal to get that sandwich. That's the sort of level of want that you need to make a character work. And if you've got that, if you've figured out what the character wants, if you know what their relationship is to your other characters, and you know some of the background to them, then you've got the basis for creating a character. And once you've got a few characters, you can throw them onto a page and watch them run around with one another, and that will be a play. The other thing to keep in mind about character is this thing that we call voice. That is how the character speaks. Because when you write a script, you're going to be writing the words that this character says. So it's useful to know how a character is going to speak. Now, by voice, we don't mean, like, do they have a high voice, or do they have a low voice, or do they have a Northern accent? That's sort of separate. By voice, we mean, what are the words that this character uses? Because those are the words you're going to be putting on the page. And what you'll realize is that everyone's voice is different. I use different words in a different rhythm than your teacher might use, or your mom might use, or your best friend might use, or the president of a bank, or the school bully. They all have a different voice, a different sort of language that they use. And the trap that many young playwrights fall into is that all of their characters sound the same. They all sound pretty much like the playwright sounds, because they're just putting their own voice on the page. So to create realistic characters, you've got to be able to create characters whose voices are different. There are 3 elements that go into voice. The first and most obvious of them is vocabulary. Those are the words that the character uses. A big intellectual guy from Yale might use lots of really big words. A plumber from New Jersey might not use such big words, but that plumber from New Jersey might have some very specific jargon, some plumbing terms. I don't know what plumbing terms are, but very specific technical words that the guy from Yale wouldn't have. So that's vocabulary, the words that they use, which may change. Things like slang, all those things are part of vocabulary. Another part is what we call syntax. Syntax is how much the characters actually obey the rules of grammar. This is the great thing about playwriting. All those specific rules that you learned about how to write a sentence in an essay in English class, you don't necessarily need to hold to those when you are writing a play, because those characters may not speak in exactly that way. If you're writing a character who's not particularly educated, then they're probably not going to speak in a way that is very, very grammatical and very precise. So syntax is the degree to which they hold or do not hold to the rules of grammar. And finally, we have the hardest but most interesting one of these, which is rhythm. everyone speaks in a different rhythm. Some people are very short and sharp, very much like a machine gun. Other people speak in very long, flowing sentences that roll around before they get to the point and take forever to get there. And different playwrights are very famous for this. There's a guy named David Mamet, and he writes characters who talk like machine guns, and they swear a lot. It's great. Other writers like Tennessee Williams write characters whose sentences go on for like an hour, and they loop around, and they're very poetic, because that's how people talk. We all have a different rhythm in addition to vocabulary and syntax. And the more that you listen to people just in your daily life, the more you'll realize the differences in rhythm that there are. So as you're writing a character, these are things to keep in mind. How is their vocabulary and their syntax and their rhythm different from one another and different from myself? So those are the sort of first concepts to keep in mind. Aristotle's 6 elements of theater: plot, character, theme, language, spectacle, and music. And then focusing on this idea of character, knowing what a character wants, knowing their packing, and knowing the elements of their voice. And that's our first video.